Good morning, everyone. We have one more nematode which is pending since the last class. We'll finish that and we'll go along with cestodes, right? Today's topic is guinea worm and other cestodes. So, guinea worm, it has almost been eradicated from India, but nevertheless, we need to know this. I don't know. I don't think any of you remember dwelling wells and all. During our childhood days, we used to have dwelling wells. They used to have a platform around the well, and then they used to fill their utensils with water. So during this process, this disease was quite common those days. Nowadays, it is not anymore seen. So, guinea worm, it is caused by Dracunculus medinensis. Instance has declined because of global eradication efforts, and only 30 cases have been identified worldwide in 2017, and it is endemic only in few areas of Chad and Ethiopia. So, how do humans acquire this? Humans acquire when they ingest water containing cyclops, which are infected with larvae of Dracunculus medinensis. And this cyclops, it is a crustacean. That is, it acts as an intermediate host. The definite host is human. So the life cycle is like this. So once the larva, the human drinks the unfiltered copepods. These copepods, they have L3 larvae, and this larvae, they are ingested by the human body, and in the stomach, it penetrates. These larvae, they are released from the copepods, and they penetrate the stomach and intestinal wall. Here they reproduce and mature in the subcutaneous tissue, and this female worm, it migrates to the surface of the skin in the lower extremities, and it causes a blister, and through the blister the worm discharges. Many a times the worm just stays there, and it can become calcified and crustated also. So this blister, if it bursts open, this discharges this larvae into the water whenever the feet comes in contact with water. Here, this larva is consumed by the copepods in the water. And these cyclops, again, these larvae, it molds into L3 larvae, and it is again, either it infects the fish in the water, or this water is drunk by humans, again completing the cycle. So in intermediate host, it can be other dogs also can eat these fish, uncooked fish, and they also can be infected. So what are the features like? There will be no clinical manifestations, but just before the blister formation occurs, there will be onset of fever and allergic symptoms, including periorbital edema, wheezing, and urticaria. Uh, Whenever the worm is emerging out, there will be local cellulitis or local pain and swelling will be there. And whenever this blister ruptures, the adult worm is released into the water, and then symptoms are relieved. So this is a typical blister, which is seen in the foot of the infected female. The shallow ulcer surrounding the emerging adult usually heals over weeks to months, but it can become secondarily infected, and it can further cause cellulitis of the limb, or abscess formation can occur, and even tetanus can be caused because of this. So sometimes the adult worm does not emerge, and it can become encapsulated and calcified, and it remains in the body. How do you diagnose this case? You cannot do any, there are no egg formation, you cannot do any other examination. You just have to see the adult worm which emerges from the blister. So treatment is just nothing but you just wind the worm around a stick. So you gradually extract it by winding it over a stick. So it comes out few centimeters every day, and you remove it. Worms also may be excised surgically, but there is no drug available for this infestation. So this is how the worm is being removed. So it is wound around a stick slowly over few days. How do you prevent this? So obviously you'll have to filter the water. You have to provide safe drinking water to all, so that this disease can be eliminated. Initially they used to use muslin cloth for filtering water, or some other filters used to be used. Likewise, this has been eradicated from our country. So that finishes our nematodes topic. So now we'll come to cestodes. So what are these cestodes? These are flat segmented worms, also called as tapeworms. In these, the adults reside in the gastrointestinal tract, but larvae can be found in any organ because larvae form the cysticercate. So they are found in almost any organ of our body. So there are 5 tapeworms which commonly infect the humans. The large tapeworms, there are 3 tapeworms. One is Taenia saginata, called as beef tapeworm. It can reach up to a length of 25 meters. And Taenia solium, which is also called as pork tapeworm, usually reaches about 7 meters in length. And Diphyllobothrium latum, that is the fish tapeworm. It also is a long one. It can also reach up to 10 meters in length. And the smaller tapeworms, we have 2. One is Hymenelolepis nana. It does not require any intermediate host for its survival. It is also called as dwarf tapeworm. It is only 2.5 to 4 centimeters, 2.5 centimeters to 4 centimeters in length. And the last one is Echinococcus granulosus, which is also called as dog tapeworm. It is also very small, so it is only up to 2.5 centimeters in length. So these are the 5 tapeworms which infect the humans. And Taenia saginata, humans are the only definite host for Taenia saginata and Taenia solium and Hymenelolepis nana. But Hymenelolepis nana does not require any intermediate host. Taenia solium sometimes can also be infected in the intermediate host also. So intestinal cestodes, usually how they have a head. The adult tapeworm usually has a head, also called as scolex, and it has a short neck after the scolex, and then after that, after the neck, you have a chain of segments. Usually the most proximal one to the neck is immature segment, and as it matures, it goes behind, and another immature segment forms between the neck and that mature segment. So these segments are termed proglottids. These are the ones which have eggs. So the proglottids, the eggs. And tapeworm, they do not have any digestive system or any vascular system. Usually nutrients are absorbed directly from the cuticle. And they are hermaphrodites. So cross fertilization occurs in the proglottids, and they don't require any male and female worms. So Taenia saginata, it's a beef tapeworm. It occurs in all the countries where raw and uncooked beef is eaten, and it is most prevalent in sub-Saharan African and Middle Eastern countries. And humans are the only definitive host for this Taenia saginata. And these worms, they can reach up to 25 meters in length, and they can have up to 1,000 to 2,000 proglottids. And usually they inhabit the upper jejunum. And this colex has 4 prominent suckers which go and fix to the upper jejunum. And each gravid segment has 15 to 30 uterine branches. So these eggs are formed in the proglottids. They measure up to 30 to 40 micron meters, and they have an oncosphere, and they have a thick brown striated shell. And these eggs, once they're deposited, once they're passed in the feces, they are deposited on the vegetation, and they can live for months or years, and whenever till they are ingested by cattle or other herbivores. So the life cycle goes on like this. The humans, they ingest the infected raw or uncooked meat, and this meat, we see for the Taenia saginata and solium, the life cycle is similar. So Taenia saginata or Taenia solium, the scolex attaches to the intestine, and here in the intestine, the adults are formed. Adult proglottids are formed, and proglottids will be passed in the feces. So once the proglottids are passed in the feces, these proglottids, they release the eggs. These eggs can be eaten by the cattle or pigs. So cattle in cases of Taenia saginata and pigs in cases of Taenia solium. Once they eat, they hatch, and oncospheres hatch here, and they penetrate the intestinal wall of the either cattle or pig, and these they circulate into the musculature, and these oncospheres they enter the musculature of these cattle or pigs, and they are called as cysticercae in the muscle. And whenever this meat is eaten by humans, it is again infective to the humans. So humans have two forms. One will be the intestinal phase, where the adult worms are there in the intestine, leading to mild abdominal pain or something like that. And these cysticercae, they also can go into the other parts of the body, where they also can settle into the muscles, where that is the end stage for these worms. They can form cysticercae, and these cysticercae will be in the muscles. They can go into the lungs, it can go into the liver or anywhere, or even in the brain, most probably in the brain, where it causes neurocysticercosis in case of Taenia solium. So Saginata and solium, they have a similar life cycle. So clinical manifestations, the only manifestation will be passage of proglottids. The patient will complain of passing something motile proglottids, and they'll experience some discomfort when these proglottids are being discharged. They can have mild abdominal pain or discomfort, nausea, vomiting can occur, and they can also lose weight. Diagnosis, usually you have to detect eggs or proglottids in the stool, and the eggs may also be present on the perianal area. Like pinworms, you can also put a cellophane tape and you can take a swab from the perianal region. So this is a picture of an egg which has a thick shell surrounding the egg. And the eggs are indistinguishable. Taenia solium and Taenia saginata, they look similar. The only thing is you have to examine the scolex and proglottids to identify the species. Treatment, a single dose of praziquantel 10 mg per kg is highly effective, and single dose is enough. How do you prevent? You'll have to eat well cooked beef or pork, and if you expose the beef or pork for temperatures as low as 56 degrees Celsius for 5 minutes also will kill the cysticercae. And refrigeration or salting for long periods or freezing at minus 10 degrees Celsius for 9 days also kills the cysticercae. And you'll have to take care of proper disposal of human pieces, and beef or pork should be inspected before consumption. The next organism is Taenia solium, and here we already told that humans are the only definitive host, and pigs are usual intermediate hosts. So other animals can also have these larval forms, but pigs are the most common usual intermediate host. So there are two distinct infections. One is adult tapeworms in the intestine, and larval tapeworms in the larval forms in the tissues caused cysticercosis. So these Taenia solium, it is found worldwide in areas where pigs are raised, most prevalent in Latin America, Africa, India, China, and Southeast Asia. The features again will be asymptomatic. Intestinal infections are usually asymptomatic. Maybe they'll have a mild abdominal pain. Other than that, they'll be asymptomatic. Fecal passage may be noted by the patients. The larval form which causes cysticercae, they'll be found anywhere in the body, but usually they are most commonly detected in the brain, CSF, skeletal muscle, subcutaneous tissue, or eyes. So the clinical presentation depends where these cysticercae are there and how many are there, and what is the inflammatory response by the host, or is there any scarring? Because depending on these, the clinical presentation also depends. Neurological manifestations are the most common ones. With seizures, usually neurocysticercosis case, many cases come to us with seizures. The first time seizures, they can be generalized focal or Jacksonian type of seizures, and this is the most common manifestation for neurocysticercosis. And hydrocephalus can also result from CSF flow obstruction. Obstruction may be because of cysticercae obstructing the flow, or if there is any inflammation because of the cysticercae, that also can cause obstruction to the CSF flow. Or there can be arachnoiditis, which also can obstruct the CSF flow, leading to hydrocephalus. Symptoms of raised intracranial pressure can occur, which are headache, nausea, vomiting, and the changes in the vision. There can be confusion, ataxia. Sometimes dizziness can be there, and these are evident on.
అదే చిన్నది మామూలుగా
Disseminated cysticercosis. This is the case of disseminated cysticercosis where you can see established appearance in the CT scan. So these are all small neurocysticercosis. So you can see a scolex in between the black dot area is the scolex. So these are the neurocysticercosis disseminated into the brain. And this is a case where you have a cysticercosis in the liver cysticercosis. This is a muscle layer, muscle transection where you can see a cysticercosis in the muscle also. So patients with hydrocephalus, they may develop papilledema and they may display altered mental status. And whenever these cysticercosis develop at the base of the brain or subarachnoid space, they may cause meningitis or arachnoiditis. And there can be communicating hydrocephalus. There can be hemorrhages, even strokes can occur because of these cysticercosis. How do you diagnose intestinal tinea It is usually you have to detect either eggs or proglottids on examination of either feces or over the perianal area by a cellophane tape. The most sensitive methods like ELISA, PCR, and serology, they are only available at research laboratories. And in cysticercosis diagnosis will be very difficult unless you see a cysticercosis on any in a radiological examination. It is very difficult to identify it. So for neurocysticercosis, there have been a diagnostic criteria which are laid out. So we have absolute criteria, we have neuroimaging criteria, and we have clinical criteria. So of these absolute criteria, even if one absolute criteria is there, then you have to diagnose it as neurocysticercosis. So absolute criteria means you have to biopsy, you have to take a parasite, you have to demonstrate a parasite from the biopsy of either brain or CSF or spinal cord, and you have to visualize either it in the cysticercosis can be visualized in a subretinal area, or you can demonstrate a scolex within a cystic lesion on neuroimaging studies. So these three are absolute criteria. Now, neuroimaging criteria are again divided into major neuroimaging criteria, confirmative, and minor. So major, again, you have to have cystic lesions without a discernible scolex, or typical small enhancing lesions, or multilobulated cystic lesions in the subarachnoid space, or there can be typical parenchymal brain calcifications. Even multiple brain calcifications, if they are typically seen in the brain parenchyma, those also go in favor of a major neuroimaging criteria. Confirmative criteria, again, resolution of cystic lesions if they resolve spontaneously, or if you give a cysticidal drug, then if they resolve, that is a confirmative criteria. Or you see, you do a sequential neuroimaging studies and you look for migration of ventricular cysts, even that is a confirmative criteria. Minor criteria will be obstructive hydrocephalus or abnormal enhancement of basal leptomeninges. Now coming to clinical or exposure criteria, if you detect specific anti-cysticercal antibodies, you do an enzyme-linked immunoelectrotransfer blot, or you examine cysticercal antigens by immunodiagnostic test. If that is detected, then it is a clinical criteria. Cysticercosis outside the central nervous system, that also can be a clinical criteria. Evidence of a household contact. Already, if there is a household contact who has been diagnosed with T. solium infection, that is also a clinical or exposure criteria. In the minor criteria, again, if there are clinical manifestations which are suggestive of neurocysticercosis in a patient who lives in the area where there is cysticercosis is endemic. This is also a minor exposure criteria. Now, how do you diagnose? Diagnosis will be confirmed if there is even one absolute criteria, diagnosis is confirmed. If you have two major criteria, that is also confirmation of diagnosis. If you have one major criteria and one confirmatory neuroimaging criteria, plus any clinical or exposure criteria, you take it as a confirmed diagnosis. Or if there is only one major neuroimaging criteria plus two clinical exposure criteria, together with if you can have excluded every other pathology, then you can confirm the diagnosis as neurocysticercosis. So when do you say it is probable? The probable diagnosis is only when one major neuroimaging criteria is there and any two clinical exposure criteria are there, or only one minor neuroimaging criteria plus at least one major clinical exposure criteria is there. you have a probable diagnosis. You can suspect and go ahead and look for a other criteria to make it a confirmed diagnosis. Now, usually if you do a CSF analysis in these patients, there will be pleocytosis with predominance of lymphocytes, neutrophils or eosinophils. Protein may be elevated. Glucose is usually normal, but it can be decreased also in many cases. How do you treat? Like that of tinea saginata, here also a single dose of praziquantel, that is 10 milligram per kg, is enough. It occasionally invokes an inflammatory response. So if there is any cryptic cysticercosis in the CNS, it evokes an inflammatory response. For this, we'll have to go with high dose glucocorticoids. Niclosamide 2 grams is also effective, but it is not widely available. So praziquantel is available at a dose of 10 milligram per kg. So neurocysticercosis, usually for seizures or hydrocephalus, we have to treat the seizures with anti-epileptic drugs. Hydrocephalus, if it is obstructive, then we'll have to do a shunt. If it is brain parenchymal cysticercus, we can give albendazole 15 milligram per kg per day for 8 to 28 days. So this is what we do in our hospital. So we give albendazole 15 milligram per kg per day for 8 to 28 days. We usually go on for 28 days. Or praziquantel can be given in a dose of 50 to 100 milligram per kg daily in 3 divided doses for 15 to 30 days. Or a combination of both can be given, and it is more effective if the patient has more than 2 cystic lesions. So both albendazole and praziquantel can be given. So a longer therapy will be needed in cases of multiple subarachnoid cysticercus. So high dose glucocorticoids are given to reduce the inflammatory response. So see, if there is any brain parenchymal cysticercus, prior to adding albendazole and praziquantel, we usually give high dose glucocorticoids to decrease the inflammatory response. Once they rupture and create an inflammatory response, to decrease that, we give glucocorticoids along with albendazole and praziquantel. So for hydrocephalus, you have to reduce the intracranial pressure. So if it is obstructive hydrocephalus, then you have to remove the cysticercus via endoscopic surgery, or you do a ventriculoperitoneal shunt. For ocular diseases, ocular cysticercus, you will have to remove by surgery. And spinal disease, you can either use a medical therapy or you can go for a surgery if it is amenable. How do you prevent? Prevention again is as for tinea saginata, you have to have a proper disposal of feces and hygiene. And vaccine is under development. If a vaccine comes, maybe in a few years we can use that. So that finishes 2 long worms. Now coming to the smaller one, which is Echinococcus, the small tapeworm. So this Echinococcus, it is caused by larval stage of Echinococcus granulosus or Echinococcus multilocularis, or you can have another, we have another organism which is E. vogeli. So granulosus sensuolato parasites, it causes cystic hydatid disease, and it is present in all continents. And Echinococcus multilocularis, it causes multilocular alveolar lesions. Usually the pulmonary lungs are involved, and these are seen in alpine, subarctic, arctic regions, and Europe, China, Central Asia, and North America. And vogeli, it causes polycystic hydatid disease, and this is seen in Central and South America. So usually the definitive host for these Echinococcus are canines, and these canines, they pass eggs in their feces. So after ingestion of the eggs, the cyst develop in the intermediate host, that is either sheep, cattle, human, or goats, camels, or horses for E. granulosus, and rodents and mice for E. multilocularis. So when a dog or fox ingests infected meat containing cyst, the life cycle is completed. So this is the life cycle. The eggs are eaten by the humans, and here the oncospheres are released, and the oncospheres, they form hydatid cyst in many organs like lungs, liver, intestines, even in the kidney, anywhere, even in the brain they can cause hydatid cyst. And these adults, whenever they are in the intestine, they form eggs and they are passed into the feces. So this adult in the dog's intestine, it can pass eggs in the feces, and this can be again ingested by an intermediate host, which can be a sheep or any other human or any other way, other person, and this cysts again can be eaten by the definitive host. So these eggs in the feces, they are once they are released into the environment, the oncosphere hatches and it penetrates the intestinal wall of the definitive host. Here they can form hydatid cyst in various organs, usually liver and lung, and this can cause a protoscolex from the cyst. And this scolex attaches to the intestine, and in the intestine, the scolex forms a fully developed adult. So how does this adult look? It is very small in size, I already told. So they have only 3 proglottids, that is one immature, one mature, and one gravid. So only 3 proglottids are there for Echinococcus. They live in the jejunum of dogs for 5 to 20 months for a long duration. And this gravid segment, it splits to release eggs, which are extremely hard. They are very hardy. And these eggs are ingested after humans ingest these eggs. The embryos escape from the eggs and they penetrate the intestinal mucosa. And from the portal circulation, they are carried to various organs, most commonly the liver and lungs. Here, hydatid cysts are formed, which are unilocular. The Echinococcus granulosus causes unilocular hydatid cysts, whereas multilocularis causes multilocular hydatid cysts. So, what are these hydatid cysts? These hydatid cysts are fluid filled, and then they consist of an external membrane and an inner germinal layer. And the daughter cysts develop from these germinal layer, and these germinating cystic structures are called brood capsules. So new larvae called protoscoleces, they develop in large numbers within the brood capsule, and this cyst expands slowly over a period of many years. So usually patients will be asymptomatic if the cysts are small. Once the cysts start expanding and becomes a space occupying lesion, so this whenever this space occupying effect involves the organ, and then the symptoms start eliciting. So initially the patient is asymptomatic. Once there is a big large space occupying lesion in the any organ, either in the liver or the lungs, these cause symptoms. So if the liver is involved, about 2/3 of cases of E. granulosus, and nearly all multilocularis cases, it will be liver is infected. So usually these patients, asymptomatic patients, they can be discovered incidentally when you do a routine X-ray or ultrasound for any other disease. These are discovered. So hepatic echinococcosis, usually the patient may complain of abdominal pain or a small mass in the right upper quadrant if the liver is enlarged. And these cystic lesions, they can also compress a bile duct, or they can leak. This cystic fluid can rupture, and there can be leakage of cystic fluid into the biliary tree, and this may mimic recurrent cholelithiasis, mimicking cholelithiasis. So they'll have pain abdomen and indigestion. So biliary obstruction also can result, and this can result in jaundice. Patient can have present with jaundice. And if there is rupture or episodic leakage, the patient may have fever, pruritus, urticaria, and anaphylaxis also. So these are multiple lesions in the liver. So you can see nice cystic lesions in the liver. There are 3 lesions. Pulmonary hydatid cyst, they may rupture into the bronchial tree or pleural cavity and produce cough, salty plug, and dyspnea, chest pain, and hemoptysis. And if these hydatid cysts, they rupture either spontaneously or while doing surgery, they may lead to dissemination. So these protoscoleces, they may disseminate and form additional cysts elsewhere in the body. So this is a typical chest radiograph where you have a oval mass with smooth borders and surrounded by normal lung tissue. The lung is absolutely normal. You have a smooth oval mass in the right lung. So this is the typical water lily sign on CT chest. So you see a water lily sign. This is the Echinococcus hydatid cyst. So if it affects bone, there can be pathological factors. There can be space occupying lesions in the central nervous system. So if these hydatid cysts are present in the brain, they can act as space occupying lesions, and depending on the lesion of the place where they are there, the symptoms can be produced. If it is in the heart, they can cause conduction defects and pericarditis may occur. and in the pelvis they may present as pelvic mass. Now the other organism, Echinococcus multilocularis, this usually presents as a slow growing hepatic tumor, and it usually progressively destroys the liver and it extends into the other vital tissues. Usually presents, the patient presents as upper and quadrant or epigastric pain, right upper quadrant pain or epigastric pain. And the patient will have, on examination, will have obstructive jaundice and liver enlargement will be there. If the lesions infiltrate adjoining organs, either diaphragm, kidney or lungs, and they also may metastasize to the spleen and brain. So diagnosis, usually rounded masses of uniform density are seen on X-rays. MRI, CT and ultrasound also may reveal well-defined cysts. Cysts can be thick or thin walled. And imaging methods usually reveal a fluid layer of different density. This is termed a hydatid sand that contains many protoscolices. So the most pathognomic finding will be daughter cysts within the larger cyst. If there are small cysts within the large cyst, then it is the most pathognomic finding. So this finding, like eggshell or mural calcification, this is the one which differentiates from other cystic lesions, like the cystic lesion because of carcinomas or any bacterial or amoebic liver abscesses or hemangiomas. So you have to have a eggshell or mural calcification finding on CT, which distinguishes from other causes of cystic lesions. Ultrasound or CT of alveolar hydatid cysts, usually they reveal indistinct solid masses. There may be a central necrosis and plaque-like calcifications. So if you aspirate, if at all aspiration is not advised, but if at all aspiration is done, you can see protoscolices of Hooklets. So fluid leakage can result in either dissemination of infection or anaphylaxis. Because of this fluid leak into the other organs, there can be anaphylactic reaction. And the serodiagnostic assays can be useful, but usually negative test does not rule out the diagnosis. And antibody detection to specific echinococcal antigens, it has the highest specificity, but not widely available. Coming to treatment is surgery, along with you can also use albendazole 15 milligram per kg daily in 2 divided doses. Usually this albendazole is used whenever you are attempting percutaneous aspiration. You inject a scolicidal agent and you aspirate percutaneously. So you initially aspirate, you inject scolicidal agent and again you re-aspirate. This is called as PAIR, and this is done for uncomplicated lesions. For complicated lesions, they have to undergo surgery. The small lesions, they'll respond very well to albendazole. Prevention, all infected drugs have to be given praziquantel, and dog should not be given access to any viscera which is infected. So, and you can also vaccinate the sheep so that you don't get infection from the sheep. Now, another tapeworm, this is a small tapeworm which is dwarf tapeworm. This is the most common of all cystode infections. This tapeworm can also cause reinfection because this is spread by fecal-oral contamination, and it is endemic in both temperate and tropical regions of the world. So here, the cysticercae of the insect. Cysticercae present in the insect, they are ingested either by mice or rodent or humans. And in the humans, the adult worms, they go into the proximal jejunum. So adults form in the jejunum. From jejunum, proglottids are released, and these proglottids, they'll be passed in the feces. And these feces are picked up by any intermediate host. Again, oncospheres hatch and they penetrate the intestinal wall of this intermediate host, usually the insect. And here, the cysticercae are formed in the body cavity. Also, the adults, once they are formed in the intestine, they can also come into the in contact with the hand of the patient. They can be re-ingested, and again the autoinfection is mostly seen with this organism. Clinical features usually asymptomatic, and a very heavy infection can lead to diarrhea, abdominal pain, and weight loss. So how do you diagnose? You have to look for eggs in the stool. So these are the typical eggs you see on a stool examination. Treatment is praziquantel 25 milligram per kg once, a single dose, or nitazoxanide can be used, which can be used in a dose of 500 milligrams twice a day for 3 days. Prevention, good personal hygiene and improved sanitation. You can also give a mass chemotherapy along with improved hygiene. The last tapeworm, that is Diphyllobotherium latum. This is found in lakes, rivers, and deltas of northern hemisphere, Central Africa, and South America. So again, these they have an intermediate host of fish is the fish, and the cyclops. Cyclops are also they act as the intermediate host. So once the patient in human, any uninfected human, he ingests the raw or uncooked fish infested with Diphyllobotherium latum. So that is why it is called as fish tapeworm. So once they ingest the scolex, these crustaceans, they form procercoid larvae. So these procercoid larvae are eaten by the fish, and these larvae, they become adults in the intestine, in the small intestine, where the proglottids they form immature eggs, and these immature eggs are released into the feces. And these unembryonated eggs, they become embryonated once they come in contact with the water. And these embryonated eggs, they are ingested by the crustaceans, that is copepods. And these copepods, in the body cavity of the copepods, they become procercoid larvae. The eggs become procercoid larvae. These procercoid larvae again are released into the water, and here they develop into plerocercoid larvae, and these are eaten up by the fish. And if these fish, if they are not cooked properly or they are eaten by the humans are infected. So usually the patients again will be asymptomatic. They may, if the adult worms are formed in the abdomen, they may, in the intestine, they may cause transient abdominal discomfort, diarrhea, vomiting, weakness, or weight loss. And occasionally abdominal pain and intestinal obstruction may be there because of heavy infection. And in rare cases, there can be cholangitis and cholecystitis. This tapeworm, it absorbs large quantities of vitamin B12, and this interferes with the ileal B12 absorption, and hence it can cause vitamin B12 deficiency. So usually, if the patient is elderly, and the patient may have a megaloblastic anemia. It resembles pernicious anemia, and because of heavy deficiency, because of bad severe deficiency, the patient may end up having neurological sequelae of B12 deficiency also. For diagnosis, you have to detect the characteristics eggs. These eggs, they possess a operculum on one side and one knob on the other side. So these are the typical eggs of Diphyllobotherium latum. So the patients will pass these in the stool, and in stool examination you can see these typical eggs. The patient may also have mild to moderate eosinophilia on examination. Treatment is praziquantel 5 to 10 milligram per kg once, which is very effective. And if the patient is having megaloblastic anemia, parenteral B12 has to be given if B12 deficiency is there. Prevention, you have to heat fish to 54 degrees Celsius for 5 minutes, or you can freeze it for 18 degrees Celsius for 24 hours. Or you place fish in a brine with high salt concentration for long periods to kill the eggs. That finishes Cestose, and I think I have finished all the parasites for this semester. Next class, I think we'll have altitude illness and hypothermia. Thank you.